Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the conference. We have, knock on wood, fixed our glitches, and so we are getting a real life lesson into the challenges of virtual learning and virtual connectivity during this age of the pandemic. And, as we've been talking about over yesterday and earlier today, education already is such a field that affects everyone so deeply and on so many levels, local, national, international. It's so interconnected, but of course, in order to be interconnected, you have to be connected virtually. The pandemic has heightened our reliance on digital learning, and of course, that has its pros and its cons. Throughout this country and throughout the world, parents are struggling to teach their kids at home. Kids are struggling to learn at home. Institutions from Ivy League universities to elementary schools are trying to figure out how to reopen safely. Of course, we've talked a lot about how the pandemic has exposed the inequalities that have long existed in the education system. A recent report by McKinsey and Company confirmed what many experts have been fearing. It found that white students in the U.S. are likely to have lost up to 8 months in math learning, whereas students of color may be behind by up to 12 months. So we're already seeing a lot of studies confirming these disparities. On the international front, not only the pandemic, but also the current administration's immigration policies have built up barriers and threatened the kind of international exchanges that have been so critical in our globalized world. And of course, as if that is not enough, we are in the midst of political upheaval, if you will, at home, or at least a major transition of power in the next few weeks that will radically reshuffle the deck. So on that note, I'm pleased to bring on board our speakers of the day to talk about what we might expect from the new administration. We have Arne Duncan, who served as the education secretary under President Obama from 2009 to 2015. Hi, Arne. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, and sorry about all the technical difficulties.
No, it's, knock on wood, we've got it now. So Arne today is the managing partner at the Emerson Collective, and he's also returned to Chicago to improve the lives of young adults in his hometown. And prior to joining the Obama administration, he served as CEO of Chicago Public Schools, winning praise for, among other things, opening 100 new schools, expanding various programs, boosting the caliber of teachers, and establishing public-private partnerships. We're also very happy to have Carrie Murakami, a reporter for Higher Insider Education, who serves the Washington area by covering complex issues such as telecommunications, banking, education policies, and Congress, and Arne, your former home, the Department of Education. So hi, Carrie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. And so let's see, gentlemen, to say that things will change under a new Biden administration is probably the understatement of the year. It's kind of like saying 2020 hasn't been so bad so far. Obviously when it comes to education, similar to other departments, there's certain to be a fundamental shift in both policies and guiding principles. President Trump's education secretary, Betsy DeVos, has been a polarizing figure since she took on the role in 2017. She has been a strong supporter of private and charter schools. And Arne, you are well aware of what a minefield that can be. She did court controversy recently for advocating for schools to reopen during the pandemic. Just a few days ago, though, President-elect Joe Biden announced that he would aim to reopen the majority of American schools by the end of April. So Arne, I know we have a lot to unpack here, but kind of taking the 30,000-foot view, what do you see being the most fundamental shift in education priorities under a Biden administration, both in the short term and also in the long term?
Well, I think, again, this is my personal opinion. I'm always very honest, and people may not agree. I think, quite honestly, too often with the Trump administration, the point was actually to be cruel, and that's a tough thing to say, but that's my honest perception of so much of what they tried to do. And even the idea of sending kids back to schools that weren't safe without any resources, putting kids, putting teachers, putting parents in danger, in harm's way. That was done only for political purposes. That really wasn't done because you really cared about the kids having that experience. So what Vice President Biden has said is that's his goal, to get kids back into school safely. But that's going to come. The only way that's going to happen would be with a massive influx of resources to schools to help keep them safe. And that's what never happened with the Trump administration. So at the end of the day, I think you'll see, as you said, a 180-degree shift in tone and tenor that's focused on kids, health and safety first, focused on increasing educational opportunity, focused on empowering parents, and focused on respecting teachers.
Mm-hmm. Now, just a brief follow-up on that. As we all know, as political observers, as you said, reopening schools requires money. We are in the midst of the daily roller coaster ride of a potential stimulus package. Even if it is approved, there's no guarantee of further stimulus once Joe Biden takes the helm. And, he is facing potentially a Republican-controlled Senate. The Democratic majority in the House is much thinner than it was prior to the election. I mean, what are your thoughts? And then, Carrie, we'll go over to you similarly. What are your thoughts in terms of what the appetite will be among Republicans to add educational funding to the level that Biden, would need in order to pursue this agenda?
I say all the time, education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue or nonpartisan issue. There's nothing Republican or Democrat about giving more kids access to high quality pre-K, or getting kids back into school safely, or increasing graduation rates, or making college more accessible or affordable. So I get the political polarization that our country's facing now, the huge level of divisiveness, which is not good for anybody. But if there's any place we should and must come together, this has been a horrific year for kids, for families, for teachers. As you said, our kids are falling behind. Unfortunately, we probably have a couple million kids that have not returned to physical school, have not returned to school at all since the pandemic hit in March. And so if there's any place for common ground, I would just desperately hope and plead, quite frankly, that to be around doing the right thing by our nation's 50 million plus school children.
Mm-hmm. Now, Carrie, over to you. Also in a similar vein, when it comes to universities, Joe Biden has pledged to invest more in science and research, and I think this obviously really ties into his larger, foreign policy ethos, if you will, of reinvesting in talent back home in order to compete with competitors abroad. So again, this has been a pledge by the future Biden administration, but how likely is that kind of funding for colleges and universities to come through potentially next year?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think in terms of cultural shifts. I mean, it's another big change. Is this administration talks about science, and believes in science. So it's a big shift. I mean, I think everything that Arnie's saying about the importance of education is very true. I think the tough part is there's people pushing for environmental programs, Green New Deal, and there's a lot of competing things that they're going to be wanting to spend money on. Healthcare. I mean, there's lots of really important things out there. So I guess we'll see. A lot depends on the Senate elections and the special elections in Georgia next month, which will determine control of the Senate. I think it's tougher than I think people forget to forget that there's moderate and conservative Democrats as well. So the best that the Democrats can do in the Senate is a tie with Vice President Harris casting the deciding vote. But we'll see if we'll see how the moderate and conservative Democrats in the Senate do. So a lot of things are up in the air. There's a lot of competing priorities right now, and there's the little pandemic thing, which is going to cost a lot of money, and so it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, potentially things that the president-elect talks about is transformative, right? Making college free, canceling student debt, but those things are going to cost trillions of dollars, and I think we'll see where things end up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, on that issue, student debt. I think it's fairly safe to say that Joe Biden would continue the moratorium on and not put millions of borrowers into default, but then getting into the arena of actually debt loan forgiveness is a whole different ball game. But I want to stay on the topic of money and continue with you, Carrie, in terms of what the pandemic has also really showed us is we've had this long-standing issue of affordability and Americans being priced out of college. I mean, I remember affordability was an issue when I went to college many more eons ago than I care to admit. But I was fortunate enough to go to my state school. So shout out to University of Maryland and any Terps in the audience. But I remember even back then being amazed at the cost of private institutions, and every year these costs have increased. And so now we have this paradox that the pandemic has created, where it was already expensive for Americans to attend college. Now Americans are facing even more financial hardships. Students are taking gap years. Many are questioning why they should pay full tuition for online courses. And then on the flip side, we have colleges that say they can't afford to lower tuition because they're losing students, including, relevant to our audience, international students who tend to pay full tuition. And they say they're hemorrhaging money as well. I mean, I know that it's such a complex interplay of a longstanding crisis compounded by a brand new crisis. But Carrie, what are your thoughts on affordability in college? Has the pandemic kind of forcing us to reach finally this breaking point? Is there anything we can do, or anything colleges themselves need to adjust their model in order to do?
Yeah, I think it's been a crisis for years, and the cost of college has put a lot of students in deep in debt, even before the pandemic, and there's a lot of things going on, for students, we see that in the numbers, like enrollment's down 3%. The percentage of freshmen is down 13%, and it's exacerbating the disparities that are out there. A number of Black and Hispanic and Native American students in community colleges is down like a third, like 30%. And I think a lot of that is, a lot of students work, the way through school, and they tend to work service, related jobs, and they're the ones getting laid off. And so, their families used to help, but they're getting laid off. And so, I think some students are questioning the value of going to college if it's going to be online, but a lot of students just can't afford it because they have to work and help out their families. I mean, there's this big crisis out there, and there's so much. I think it's easy to forget the role of state funding, but I mean, it's not just the federal government that's running for money.
Right.
And what's happened in the last 2 decades is the states have cut back. During the Great Recession, they cut back on their funding for higher education, and that hasn't really come back. And what happened was with less state money, the colleges raised tuition, and that was a big part of it. And now the states are hurting again, and so there's not a whole lot of help coming from them either. And in fact, there's going to be major cuts. In colleges, I mean, there's not a whole lot they can do because they can't raise tuition that much. Because kids can't afford to pay it, and which would exacerbate the enrollment problem, and they're getting hit on all sides, right? I mean, they're losing tuition money, which means they're losing room and board. A part that's not talked about very much is that there's like these ancillary revenues that the colleges get. You know, like things like renting out the auditorium for conferences, you know, parking, you know, and they've lost a lot of money in that regard. So I think they're really relying on Congress and the president to come through with more emergency.
Arnie, just really quickly, your thoughts on the same issue on affordability in higher education. I mean, again, is this really something that, you know, the federal government ultimately has to tackle, or are there ways that colleges and universities themselves will need to step up somehow and figure out a new financial model?
Well, I think it's all of the above, and it is, as Carrie knows so well, so much is funding. You know, you talk about the University of Maryland comes at the state level, and so where states cut back on that, you know, on funding, on investment, that money that cost gets passed on to parents and students in terms of tuition. So again, Republican or Democrat, we need to elect people at the state level, governors, and folks in the legislative body who want to see education as an investment, as something we want to put money behind. I think bigger picture, what I believe the K-12 model has served us pretty well for the past century. I actually think it's insufficient going forward, and this is sort of a big idea, but I would love to see us move to a pre-K to 14 model and at least have those first 2 years of college or community college be free. Vice President's wife, Jill Biden, Dr. Biden has been an amazing community college teacher forever. And we know today a high school diploma is critical, but it's not enough to get a job. There's going to be some learning beyond that, 2-year, 4-year trade, technical, vocational training. So I would love to, as a country, think about starting much earlier with 3- and 4-year-olds so they're ready to be successful in kindergarten, and then have everyone have a next step in their educational journey once they graduate from high school. So I'd love to see us move to a pre-K to 14 model.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's interesting. I know we've written about over the years the incredible surge of enrollment in community colleges, the high quality of education that they offer, and of course, as you said, now having Jill Biden as First Lady could be a real game changer for community colleges. So, related to the issue of affordability is, of course, disparities and inequalities. Virtual learning has really exposed this digital divide between low income, high income students, between white students, students of color, wealthier school districts and their underserved counterparts. Even here I'm in Maryland, but nearby in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, had a disastrous rollout of online instruction. And Fairfax is one of the wealthiest counties in the country. Since then, most schools here, including in Washington, D.C., have been able to provide students with laptops. But an interesting point was raised yesterday by a representative from Google, who's actually a former public schools teacher in Chicago. So she's also really been in the trenches. And her point was that it's not enough just to equip kids with the technology. There has to be that foundation of knowing how to use the technology and the quality of education, which is an issue in underserved communities. So, and of course, another point that she raised and many of the panelists raised, which was, we keep talking about the problems that the pandemic has exposed, but, potentially a silver lining of sorts is it will offer us the opportunity to take the lessons that we've learned to really address these deeply rooted crises, especially in terms of inequality. So, on that note, Arnie, can you talk to us of what you think President-elect Biden can do to address these digital disparities, not just in the long term, but in the immediate term, because, as we know, probably a lot of schools will remain, virtual or in a hybrid model going into spring.
Well, that's why it's so hard. People keep saying what should be his top priorities, and there's so much that's both urgent and important. So I'll hit your point first. that we have to make access not just to devices, but to the internet, to Wi-Fi, as ubiquitous as water and electricity. And the idea that kids can only learn in a physical school building 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 9 months of the year doesn't make any sense. And whether it's a inner city community, whether it's in Appalachia, whether it's on a Native American reservation, our kids have to be able to learn anything they want, anytime, anywhere. And that 24/7. And so that fundamental shift that the Biden administration can lead and work with the FCC and work with public-private partnerships. This is a place that's right for those kinds of things. We just have to make that commitment. It should have happened a long time ago. Should have happened pre-pandemic. It has to happen now. But it's so much more than that. So that's a starting point. Schools aren't just places of learning. They're social safety nets. And so we've worked out the pandemic to help make sure kids and their families get fed. And food insecurity is skyrocketing, unfortunately. The need is just stunning. So we've done a weekly call. If some system breaks down, we figure out another way to do that with school districts, with nonprofit partners in the food space. We have to keep that going. Unfortunately, that need is only increasing. It's not decreasing. And the other thing is really thinking about kids' social and emotional needs. There were lots of kids dealing with lots of stress, lots of trauma pre-pandemic. And now, unfortunately, there have been millions of additional children whose worlds have just been turned upside down. Families that were relatively stable, maybe living paycheck to paycheck, but those paychecks have disappeared. And now, it's just a very, very scary time for kids and families. So the educational piece is huge. I never want to walk away from that. But for me, the foundation is our kids have to be fed. We have to handle food insecurity. And then their social and emotional needs have to be met. And people doing incredibly, creative stuff, distributing food outside of schools, again, literally from day one of the pandemic. Telehealth, teachers, social workers, counselors, psychologists checking on kids' needs. But if those needs are met, then let's talk about the academic part. But for me, we have to take care of those foundational needs first before we even get to the education piece.
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent point. We had yesterday experts talking about mental well-being for students, because it's not just the educational impact, it's the emotional impact. I mean, it was disturbing. A CDC study came out that 1 in 4 young people had contemplated suicide over the last 30 days. So this virtual learning has been a lifesaver, but there's a very dark side to it. So I wanted actually, Ernie, to follow up on that with a twofold question. One, logistically, do you think that given these disparities, and they've been, here locally, Montgomery County also just came out with a study of, how students of color are rapidly falling behind their white peers. Do you think that schools should adopt a pass-fail system moving forward? And the second question, should there also be more motivation and more of a push to reopen schools, because that has been shown not only to bridge this achievement gap, but for all of the emotional benefits that it brings?
So these are really important and complex questions. I'm going to try and sort of get into them in detail. For me, the real question, honestly, isn't whether you move to a pass-fail. The question is, are you getting the kids that need the most help, the help that they desperately need? And so I've been pushing hard. We need a national tutoring program. We have millions of kids who have fallen behind. Unfortunately, we may have a couple million kids who literally have not returned to school. We have to go find them. And we know that high-intensity tutoring, be it physically, be it virtually, be it hybrid, that's the best way to have kids catch up. And so for me, it's less about the grading system or whatever else might be. I don't want to just sort of paper over the challenges. We can't have kids, as you talk about the start, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months behind. It's just, that's untenable. And so I want to hold us accountable as adults to find those kids, to get them the help they need. I don't want to go back to quote unquote normal, because normal didn't serve too many kids well enough. We should reimagine education. So how do we help kids catch up sort of between now, call it January, and the fall, August, September, so they're not that far behind going into the next school year? So tutoring, longer school days, Saturdays, not everyone's going to love this idea. We don't need summers off for most kids now. We need them to be in school, catching up again.
That's physically. The debate that was happening before the pandemic of whether, cutting summers down.
Right. So we just have to give kids what they need. What's been constant in education is time, and what's been the variable is learning. We got to flip that Time has to be the variable and learning has to be the constant. And then in terms of opening schools, as you know so well, I've said this so many times, that schools aren't islands. They don't exist in a bubble. The best way to open schools is to beat down this pandemic in our communities. And as we all know, unfortunately, virtually every state, 47, 48 states, the numbers are increasing on a daily basis to staggering rates of sickness, of hospitalization, of death. And we just, as a country, have not prioritized kids. We've prioritized bars, we've prioritized adults. I've always said you need public health first, public education second, and then reopen the economy. We've done things in a different order, and it simply doesn't work. So yes, when it is possible and safe to open, we should do that. We should open with the youngest children first. We should prioritize the most vulnerable children where home might not be a good learning environment or may not be safe. And we got to do it, slowly and carefully, and trying to, I would say the goal is not to open schools, is to keep them open. But we have to make some much harder choices as adults to reduce to beat down this pandemic, to reduce the spread of the virus in our communities, to give our kids a chance to go to a bricks and mortar school.
Well, and certainly that is, that's been a huge issue I've encountered with the diplomats I talk to, is, pointing out Europe's reopened its schools. Why can't you? I mean, it's a blunt question, and it's true, as you said, that there are priorities. And I know now, Carrie, looking at on the university front, locally, I just got an email from University of Maryland that in the spring they're going to continue mostly online, 75%, 25% in person. The thing that we've been seeing is this kind of seesaw of reopening. You get a cluster of cases, closing down, reopening. What are you seeing in terms of universities that have reopened successfully and continue to stay open? What from your perspective, what are they doing right that possibly other institutions can learn from?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, it's really tied to its resources. I mean, I think Duke has gotten some notice for being successful and doing a ton of testing, most smaller universities like historically Black universities and college, I mean, they don't have the same resources, and so like Purdue, the former governor Mitch Daniels was really pushing the idea of reopening schools, and they got like the plexiglass barriers in the classrooms between the professors and the students. Mm-hmm. I mean, they most colleges can't afford to do that, right? And so that's another way where the disparity is playing itself out. I haven't seen numbers in terms of college students getting sick based on race and class, but it seems like the schools with the more resources have do better in terms of being able to protect people and also stay open. So I think a lot of the American Council for Education, which is the main body that represents colleges and universities in DC, they were talking about how the amount that colleges set aside to do testing earlier this year, they ended up spending double that, and so they're running out of money, and I guess that's one of the reasons why they're asking for more relief. Mm-hmm. So and I don't know if there's any easy answer to your question. I think a lot of it depends on money.
Yeah, no, of course, and we've talked to as you said, every school is doing differently. K to 12, university level. Certainly about resources. We talked to quite a few varied. Arizona State University, from Merit Academy, local private school, and in addition to resources, there were certain strategies that they employed. I know Radford University, for instance, mentioned kind of this social contract with students to be responsible. Obviously, testing is an enormous part, but not everything as well. It was a lot of, for instance, Merit Academy mentioned constant communication with parents by phone, not by email. So that they understood the risks and said, hey, these are the risks. What do you want to do? So it's such a diverse array of approaches and strategies. And so, Arnie, I'm wondering on that front, I know that, Joe Biden has said that, that he supports kind of a national roadmap to avoid this kind of current patchwork of what he's described as the chaotic and politicized process. So of course it would be good to get more guidance from the federal government, but on the other side, critics say that this blanket kind of approach or dictating to schools how they should reopen, ignores the nuances that each district is facing. So what are your thoughts on having the federal government provide more guidance on this issue?
Yeah, well, I'm always very blunt and honest, and people can agree or disagree or push back. But I mean, we talk about talking to diplomats from other countries. The truth is, they have been able to open schools. My wife is Australian. Her sister, her brother, their kids, her parents—they're basically living their lives, and that's true in lots of places. And we just have lacked federal leadership, and it's had a devastating impact, of course, on education, but on human suffering. And we have to this pandemic doesn't know red state or blue state. It doesn't know urban or rural. It doesn't know any of that. It spreads everywhere. And the fact that we have desperately lacked that federal leadership has been just catastrophic. And if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that to solve big problems, you need a functioning government, that it really leadership does matter. And so we have needed a national strategy. We have needed clear guidance. We have needed a priority on health and safety and not on the politics of this thing. And, again, the lack of that for months has just hurt us in every way imaginable. And it's going to take us, years and years to dig out from that. So, yes, clarity from Washington, again, not dictating, not mandates, but clarity, focus on science, focus on facts, focus on the truth. I shouldn't even have to say things like that. It should be such a given. It should be so basic. But tragically in our country, that has not been the case for the past 4 years. And I look at the leadership of so many other presidents and prime ministers across the globe, and I'm so thankful for their leadership and what they've done during this terrible time. And honestly, I'm so envious that those countries have benefited from that kind of leadership, and it's been missing here.
Right. Right. And certainly, I mean, it's difficult also inherently for us because we have, I always describe America to diplomats as 50 countries in a sense. So it's this fine balance of, looking toward the federal government, but you also have so many local state factors to consider. But speaking of federal government policies, I want to switch gears to a major issue before the pandemic that has been eclipsed, by the coronavirus. But of course, which is one of the most contentious in education and in general, which is the Trump administration's immigration policies. Obviously, he has tightened the rules for both illegal and legal immigration. These range from refugee admissions to the so-called Muslim travel ban, just to making it harder to obtain both foreign student and foreign worker visas. So I want to get into this subject. I mean, most recently, a federal judge has restored the Obama-era DACA program for Dreamers, immigrants who came to this country as children. So it certainly was another blow to President Trump's attempts to end the program, but there are still a number of lawsuits out there challenging it. So, certainly, President-elect Biden is likely to restore the program. I would say the permanent solution ultimately has to come from Congress. I mean, do you think we could finally get to this level where we do have a congressional resolution to this debate?
Again, all I can do is just express my hope. And we all know, our country's been built by immigrants. And immigrants are the job creators, they're the entrepreneurs, they're the innovators. To the rest of the world, honestly, all I can do just as a private citizen is just apologize for what we've seen and felt for the past 4 years. And hopefully folks watching this understand that that's not fundamentally who we are, that what's happened has been an aberration, but it's just a devastating one. And to open up our doors so that people can come here to get educated, to build businesses, to raise families, to strengthen our communities. That's literally who we are. Mm-hmm. And to walk so far away, move so far away from our values has been unbelievably of many painful things. That's been near the top of the list. Mm-hmm. For me, it's not just sort of restoring the rights of DACA students. It's actually getting them financial aid for college, which they still don't have access to. Mm-hmm. And we weren't able to get that done during the Obama administration. So I desperately hope that as we move forward into 2021, we have dreamers who get great grades. Sometimes they're valedictorians, they're community leaders, they're doing everything right. And then basically we slam shut the door of opportunity once they graduate from high school. We're cutting off our nose to spite our face. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I would desperately want to see that breakthrough happen as we move into the new year.
So Carrie, going over to you, and certainly the issue of immigration policies, specifically in regards to student visas, has had really such an impact on U.S. colleges and universities. We talked a lot, on the statistics of international student enrollment, how they have been trending downward. Most recently, the administration proposed setting fixed timeframes for student visas instead of the current open-ended system where students have to show that they're currently enrolled in school. So obviously the concern is, if you have a 4 or 2 year time frame, that doesn't do much good if you're, in a graduate program that requires 4 to 6 years and so forth. So, some of these restrictions have not come to fruition and aren't likely to, but what have you seen on college campuses in terms of the effect of these immigration policies and proposals on international student enrollment?
Yeah, I think international student enrollment's down. Like I think 40%, like almost half. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to tell how much of it is the pandemic, and how much of it is the policies, and the policies certainly don't help. I mean, there's another rule that the education department did where. Or the administration did, where if you can only have the student visas if you're studying in person. If your college goes completely off, online, which is like not your decision at all, then you're in trouble. I mean, there's but I think I don't think the Biden hasn't really addressed those things specifically. I mean, he's talked about DACA, and presumably he'll be less restrictive. Arnie made a great point about the DACA students. I mean, they're still not eligible for Pell Grants. But also, like another thing we saw during the DeVos administration was in the CARES Act set aside all this money for emergency student aid, to pay for help pay for laptops, food, rent, like essential things that kids need. But the administration denied that aid to DACA kids. So so they were hurt in terms of the Pell, but also hurt in terms of getting just the emergency aid they need to just survive. And I think that'll change during the new administration.
Mm-hmm. Now, a quick foreign policy related question for both of you. We will later on have education attaché from the Embassy of China. We all know China has been, really the top of the foreign policy agenda for the Trump administration. It will continue to be. We have a fundamental shift in our approach toward China, and that's trickled down to education, mostly at the university level. What, Carrie, are your thoughts on the restrictions specifically geared toward Chinese scholars and researchers based on national security concerns? Do you think this is having an impact? Do you think this will continue or increase going forward, or will the Biden administration perhaps reassess this approach?
Yeah, it's not an area of expertise for me, and maybe perhaps Arnie has some thoughts on that. But presumably things would change under Biden. I know beyond China, like it's the whole issue of grants and funding that colleges get from foreign governments has been a real concern of Republicans in Congress, and so I think to some extent it'll continue to be an issue in terms of Congress. It seems like it wouldn't be as big of a priority as under Biden as it was under Trump, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. So Arnie, on that thought, obviously you have the position toward China, but we also have the travel ban that was geared mostly toward Muslim majority nations as well as African countries. Again, what are some of your thoughts of these education policies that are targeted around nationalities? I mean, is that appropriate given our position toward China?
No, it's wildly inappropriate, and both domestically and internationally. A huge part of Trump's agenda, and this was not subtle, it was often overt, was based upon race and racism. Mm-hmm. And again, that's not who we are. That's not who we should be. And as you pointed out very accurately, those bans were towards countries where people had a different skin color or maybe had a different religion, and it's and that played out again domestically as well, and just led to huge factions, huge violence, just stuff that would have been unimaginable a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I can promise you, I can guarantee you, I haven't had this conversation directly, but that is not going to be President-elect Biden's agenda. That's not going to be his policy. It is wildly un-American. It hurts our country, and it diminishes our standing, in the global community.
Right. So, Arnie, I appreciate your bluntness. Let's be equally blunt. Now, you were, you served for a very lengthy amount of time as education secretary. You drew both praise, but got a lot of flack for pushing states to adopt Common Core standards, kind of part of a larger emphasis on standardized testing to hold teachers more accountable. You are also have been a supporter of charter schools. And I think charter schools are an interesting phenomenon for many foreigners. And it's, again, such a complex issue. It's difficult to distill, but, generally, supporters say it offers parents a choice to put their children in better performing schools. But, of course, if talented students are leaving public schools, it inevitably begs the question of what's left for public schools, and drains them of students. So, between the charter schools and the standardized testing, which are some of the hallmarks of your tenure, looking back, what are some of your proudest successes that you think worked? And are there any regrets of some of your policies that you pushed?
Well, you always have successes and failures, so I'm happy to go through both. On the success side, I always think the best investment, the most important thing we can do is get more children into high-quality early childhood education. Mm-hmm. And the fact that our department historically did nothing in that space, and we put more than $1 billion behind that so that, literally hundreds of thousands of additional children could start kindergarten ready to go academically, socially, emotionally. Feel great about that. We got high school graduation rates to all-time highs with every subcategory of students: white, Black, Latino, poor, English language learners, special needs, everybody getting better. That felt great. I desperately wish the current administration had set a goal of 90%, and that we keep moving, and then you go 92%, 95%. This is never mission accomplished. There's always so much more work to do. We talked a little bit about the cost of higher education. We got an additional $30 billion for Pell Grants without going back to taxpayers for nickel. We simply cut out the middleman and did loans ourselves. And we went from 6 million Pell recipients to 9 million Pell recipients. And for your audience, that's often families with less economic well-being, more challenged financially, having the chance to go to school. So a 50% increase, more than 1 million additional students of color going on to college. So those are things that feel fantastic about. In terms of failures, it's interesting. On the early childhood side, I put that in both categories. For as much as we did, there was still tremendous unmet need across the country. And I desperately wish we could have put not $1 billion, but 10 billion or 20 billion. And we couldn't get some of our Republican friends in Congress to support that kind of investment. That's one. The second big failure I talk about, actually we already discussed, was not being able to get college financial aid for our dreamers. Mm-hmm. And that's was something that's always going to trouble me. And I hope they can break through. And the final one isn't quite in the education space, but it's related. The fact that we got nothing done in terms of gun control. And again, for your international audience, the level of gun violence in this country is staggering. It's actually what I'm devoting my life to here in Chicago, my hometown, of trying to reduce gun violence, whether it's in schools or whether it's in the community. It is absolutely a man-made problem here in America. This is not looking for a cure for cancer or how to put a man on Mars. We've simply lacked the political courage to do what other countries have done. And after Sandy Hook, the massacre there in Newtown, Connecticut, which was the worst day of President Obama's presidency and my worst day in DC, the fact that we got nothing done, zero, in terms of common sense gun legislation to keep our kids and families safe and free of fear and trauma. Those would be three of the failures, the regrets that I absolutely will always feel.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad you made that point. It is a common question I get. I mean, we have, gun ownership levels that rival Yemen. And, I myself was originally born in Poland, and coming here to see what has become, unfortunately, an accepted norm in terms of gun violence. And I'm actually working on a story. I mean, the levels have surged. Ironically, other crimes have gone down because of the pandemic, except for homicides. So here in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, it's also a trend that we are dealing with. And as you said, it has affected schools on the university front all the way to elementary schools. So yeah, and again, something that the pandemic has been exacerbating. So all of these effects, are just so far-reaching and touching on long-standing problems. Hopefully, we will that it can shine a light on some of these problems and move us toward the right direction. Now, I do have to, before we close, Arnie, I have the obligatory question to ask. Thoughts on the next education secretary? I noticed there are quite a few Obama alums that have made the cut. Any thoughts yourself?
Oh, no, I loved every second of my 7 years in DC, but I'm so glad to be home, and I want to do everything I can to continue to help the Obama administration, whoever he chooses. We just have, again, all of our responsibility, opportunity, obligation is to help out. So I won't give names, I have some thoughts, but for me, the profile should either be someone with a real track record of improving student achievement at the K-12 side and really closing some of those gaps, achievement gaps based upon race, or someone who's shown the ability to do that, or someone from the higher education space and a university president, perhaps even a community college president. And again, that higher education piece of the agenda is going to be so hugely important. So those would be the two profiles. And there are lots of extraordinary people who could, who fit in those buckets, but someone who's really, really shown an ability to help kids learn and help them learn at faster paces and help them catch up, or someone who's increased not just access in the higher education space, but also increased graduation rates. The goal is never to go to college. The goal is to walk across that stage for that diploma. Right. And so those would be the kinds of people that I think President Biden will be looking for.
Great. And I'm sure, Carrie, will be reading, because you'll be covering all of these developments on a daily basis. And I did forget to mention, as a fellow journalist, you've been in the business for 30 years for a variety of outlets. So I will say kudos to you, because it is not an easy field over the last 4 years, but we're still around, and we're still hashtag real news, as I always like to joke. So I want to thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us, for bearing with us with our technical hiccup. But we, for the audience, we're moving forward. We're taking a quick break, and again, Expo networking, you can click in there, and it's a good way to, can't meet in person, but you can interact with some of the participants, the sponsor booths. So please do take advantage of this platform to do that. And we will be returning in about 10 minutes. So thank you, Arnie. Thank you, Carrie, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.